was a hole, a rare hole.
Hole,
Rattling hole, hole in the bog, bog down in the valley, oh.
ho, ho, rattling bog, bog down in the valley, oh. Ho, ho, rattling bog, bog down in the valley, oh.
And in that hole there was a tree.
Tree,
Rare tree, a rattling tree. Tree in a hole in the bog, bog down in the valley, oh.
Whoa, let's stop right there, Mike. Hello from Missouri Ozarks. We're Mike and Nancee, and we're here to share a little bit of the Irish mythologies and folklore. But right now, we're going to teach you a tune called Rattling Bog. And you're saying to yourself, what's a bog? Well, a bog is kind of like a swamp, kind of murky, icky water. But in Ireland, they dry up sometimes, and they're called ancient bogs. And rattling, what does rattling mean? Rattling's fun, having a good time, yeah. Snappy. So Rattling Bog is a happy little swamp. So we're going to teach you the chorus, and it'll be up to you to learn the verses. Are you ready? Okay, repeat after Mike.
Ho, the rattling bog.
Ho, ho, the rattling bog.
Bog down in the valley, yo.
Bog down in the valley, yo.
Ho, ho, the rattling bog.
Ho, ho, the rattling bog.
Bog down in the valley, yo.
Bog down in the valley, yo.
And on that tree there was a limb. Rare limb, a rattling limb. Limb with a tree in a hole in the bog. Bog down in the valley, yo.
Ho, ho, rattling bog. Bog down in the valley, yo. Ho, ho, rattling bog. Bog down in the valley, yo.
Down that limb there was a branch.
A branch.
Rare branch, a rattling branch. Branch and a limb in a tree in a hole in the bog.
Bog down in the valley, yo. Ho, ho, rattling bog. Bog down in the valley, yo. Ho, ho, rattling bog. Bog down in the valley, yo.
Down that branch there was a twig.
Twig.
Rare twig, a rattling twig. Twig in the branch and a limb in a tree in a hole in the bog. Bog down in the valley, yo.
Ho, ho, rattling bog. Bog down in the valley, yo. Ho, ho, rattling bog. Bog down in the valley, yo.
And in that twig there was a nest.
A nest.
Nest. Rare nest, a rattling nest. Nest in a twig. Twig in the branch and a limb in a tree in a hole in the bog. Bog down in the valley, yo.
Ho, ho, rattling bog. Bog down in the valley, yo. Ho, ho, rattling bog. Bog down in the valley, yo.
And in that nest there was an egg. Rare egg, a rattling egg. Egg in the nest in a twig. Twig in the branch in a limb in a tree in a hole in the bog. Bog down in the valley, yo.
Ho, ho, rattling bog. Bog down in the valley, yo. Ho, ho, rattling bog. Bog down in the valley, yo.
And on that egg there was a bird. Rare bird, a rattling bird. Bird in the egg. Egg in the nest in a twig in the branch in a limb in a tree in a hole in the bog. Bog down in the valley, yo.
Ho, ho, rattling bog. Bog down in the valley, yo. Ho, ho, rattling bog. Bog down in the valley, yo.
And on that bird there was a feather. Rare feather, a rattling feather. Feather on a bird on a egg in a
nest
in a
twig
in a
You say it.
branch.
Thank you.
Branch and a limb in a tree in a
Ho,
hole in the bog. Bog down in the valley, yo. Ho, ho, the rattling bog. Bog down in the valley, yo. Ho, ho, the rattling bog. Bog down in the valley, yo. Down that feather there was a flea. A mean, nasty flea. Gonna get me. Oh, it's a tick. It's a tick-tock. A tic-tac-tock. I'm going to eat you, my pretty. Tick and a feather. Feather in the bird. Bird in the egg. Egg in the
nest.
nest in the egg.
What?
Egg in the nest in the egg. Egg in a twig. Twig in the branch. Branch on a limb in a tree in a hole in the bog. Bog down in the valley, yo.
Ho, ho, the rattling bog.
Bog down in the valley, yo. Ho, ho, the rattling bog. Bog down in the valley, yo. Oh.
Hello and welcome again. Yes, I am Nancee, and this is my husband Mike. Oh yeah, I think you should put on a vest.
Yeah, I got kind of a bump there, don't I?
Oh,
Okay,
a little bump.
I'm gonna put the vest on.
So we're going to spend some time teaching you and sharing some Irish mythology and folklore. Now, if you're wondering, this is a drum. This is an Irish drum, actually, called a bowrin. And this is my tipper. And I'm just striking it back and forth. No, I believe you turn it around.
Okay.
And Mike was playing what was called a bouzouki.
Yeah.
It's used in lots of traditional
Take
Irish
out 9
music.
banjo players with one shot.
Ba-da-bum. All right, so Irish mythology. Now, the Irish have their own mythology, kind of like the Romans and the Greeks do, that you learned in school, or you will learn in school for your little ones. You know, Zeus, Hercules, Athena.
Hercules!
Sorry, I didn't mean to hurt you.
That didn't hurt. I'm Hercules.
But the Irish mythologies are not very well known outside of Ireland. So all the people, of course, of Ireland know, but not us who were not born on the Emerald Isle. So there is a whole lot of information about Irish mythologies. Lots of wonderful characters and stories, and I invite you to look them up yourself.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to share a wee bit for the wee bit of time we have today. So the Irish mythologies, they're called cycles, and there's 4 cycles in the historical writings. The first cycle is called the mythological cycle.
And the third one would be the tricycle.
Second one would be bicycle. So, mythological cycle. This is where we find out their creation story. Now, of course, the creation story, there's lots of cultures that have their own creation story. Of course, this is BC, before Christ. To explain how Earth got to where it was. In Ireland, one of the legends, now like I said, there's many legends. One of them was the Earth was filled with fire and volcanoes. It was very barren and a scary place. Well, one of these volcanoes shot up so high and went all the way to the heaven. And it bore a little hole, and out from that hole came a drop of water. Danu. Danu is the mother goddess of Ireland. And the drop of water came and met the earth, and that's when the streams and the rivers and the mountains and the trees were formed. And this is where Earth began. Well, Danu had some children, and they're called Tuatha Dé Danann. Now, the Tuatha Dé Danann, they roamed the earth for quite a bit of time until they were called back home to Ireland. Well, when they got there, what do you think? Somebody was already reigning over the poor little Emerald Isle, and they were called the Firbolgs. The Firbolgs were nasty. They're smelly. They just weren't very nice. So the Tuatha Dé Danann had a battle with the Firbolgs and won and exiled them out of Ireland. So the Tuatha Dé Danann, they reigned for quite a bit of time in Ireland until another race of people, as we'll say, came. That poor little Ireland, there's always somebody that wants to come over and take over, but that's another story. So these folks that came this time were called the Milesians. Now, some believe that the Milesians, or the Celts, are what the ancestors of our Irish today, but that is another story. So the Milesians and the Tuatha Dé Danann, they came to an agreement. The Milesians would rule on this side of the earth, and the Tuatha Dé Danann would go to the underworld, to the shade of the mountains, to the glens of the forests, way down. And through time, the Tuatha Dé Danann became the fairies of Ireland. Now, fairies, well, see, we know Tinkerbell, right? Peter Pan, Tinkerbell. They're not the Tinkerbells you think of. Now, of course, Tinkerbell was a little bit cantankerous herself, didn't she? She got a little bit jealous. Well, the fairies of Ireland, you see, the people of Ireland don't talk about them much. No. The wee people, the gentry, the wee folk, the Dinishee. They don't speak of them much, but when they do, they better speak of them nicely, or the fairies will do something naughty. See, the fairies of Ireland are not very nice sometimes. Sometimes they steal children. And I have a wonderful poem I'd like to read to you, written by William Butler Yeats. And it speaks of the stolen child. Now, William Butler Yeats, as you can see, he also collected folklore and fairy tales of Ireland with a lady called Lady Gregory. So if you look up The Celtic Twilight by William Butler Yeats, you can find out your own mythologies and fairy tales yourselves. But this is called The Stolen Child, and I'll just read a couple of stanzas for you. Where dips the rocky highland of Sleuthwood in the lake, there lies a leafy island, where flapping Hurons wake the drowsy water rats. There we've hid our very vats, full of berries, full of reddest stolen cherries. Oh, come away, oh human child, to the woods and waters wild, with a fairy hand in hand, for the world's more full of weeping than you can understand. Where the wave of moonlight glosses the dim grey sands with light, far off by the farthest Rosses, we foot it all the night, weaving olden dances, mingling hands and mingling glances, till the moon has taken flight. To and fro we leap and chase the frothy bubbles, while the world is full of troubles, and is anxious in its sleep. Come away, O human child, to the woods and waters wild, with a fairy hand in hand, for the world's more full of weeping than you can understand. Or maybe pat your knee, so we can hear the wonderful penny whistle. Mike, come on, the penny whistle. And that is called Dance of the Fairy King. All right, so we just talked about the fairies. Now, there are some fairies that are solitary.
You mentioned, solitary fairy, like Neil Diamond. I'm a solitary fairy. That's what I am.
No, he's a solitary man.
That's what I am.
Okay, solitary fairies.
So you mentioned leprechauns? Shh. Oh.
Ezra, Mike, Gah! Solitary fairies. So what are called the puka. Now the puka is the shapeshifter.
Puka, loopity-doo.
The puka is a shapeshifter. I don't know if you've heard other cultures talk about shapeshifters. There's some in the Native American stories. But a shapeshifter is someone that changes their shape. They can be a bird, or a bear, or a Mike. Puka. Now there's also a banshee. That's a very sad fairy, for she appears when one is about to die of the old Irish family, and she wails a pitiful moan, the banshee. And then, then there's the leprechaun.
I know what a leprechaun is. It's a convict with a skin condition.
A leprechaun. They're called the Librogue, one shoe fairy. They're always working on one shoe. They're the cobbler of the trade. There you go.
There's one shoe.
And that's a brogue.
Brogue.
Or brogan.
Yeah.
It's a shoe in Ireland.
Yeah.
So the Librogue, the leprechaun, has evolved through the time. You know him as a little green man who has a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. But in Ireland, he's just a wee bit of an old man. And he's always working on one shoe. And he doesn't have a very good attitude. So let's have a story about the leprechaun. It was Lady Day, the finest of all holidays during harvest time, and Tom Fitzpatrick was walking on the sunny side of the hedge, when all of a sudden he kept hearing a tapping sound. It's awful late in the season for the stone chatters to be at work, so he crept along a little bit so he could find out what that noise was and to see if he was right. So he crept along, and then he looked down at the hedge, and there, at the bottom of the hedge was a little bit of an opening like a hole, and he slowly crept down. What do you think he saw? He saw a brown pitcher. You know, like a pitcher, it's usually made of pottery, and it has a handle, and it pours out liquid. He saw a brown pitcher, so he kept looking, and then by and by, a teeny tiny wee bit of an old man with a deeshy-doshy leather apron on and a little hat cocked on his head. was pulling a stool behind him. And as he set the stool up, he climbed up on the stool and took a little piggin and dipped the full of it into that pitcher. Got down off the stool, set the piggin down, and went to work on a little bit of heel piece of brogue, just his size. That was tapping sound, of course. He kept tapping. Tom Fitzpatrick said to himself, "By the powers, a leprechaun! Well, I've often heard tell of leprechauns, but I never quite believed them myself. But there's one sure." "Oh," he said, "if I go my way knowingly, I'll be a made man." So he crept very quietly. You see, you can never take your eyes off a leprechaun, or they'll disappear as you turn away. So as a cat would a mouse, Tom slowly stooped lower and lower, until he said, "God bless your work, neighbor." The little old man looked up at Tom, a little annoyed. "Thank you kindly," he said. Tom says, "Well, I'm wondering why you work on the holiday. That's me business and none of your own." "Oh, well, so I'm wondering what's in the brown pitcher." The little old man looked at Tom. "I'll tell you what it is, young man. It'd be better for you to get along and not bothering hard-working people on such a day. See, while you're gone, the cows have got out. Your cows are out and they're knocking about your corn and they're eating all your oats." Well, Tom was a little bit taken aback and he almost turned around until he caught himself. And just so that wouldn't happen again, he reached down and caught the old man in his hand and looked at him. Now, Tom had a very mean look in his eye, and the little old man was a little bit afeared. He looked at him. "So, I'm wondering if it's true what they say about you. You got a little gold stash somewhere, a little money hidden away, and you'd be telling me about it, wouldn't you?" Well, like I said, Tom had a little bit of a mean look in his face. So the old man said, "Well, indeed I have. But it's a bit of a walk. It's a few fields over." Tom said, "That's all right." So, while carrying the old man, never taking his eyes off of him, it was a bit of a walk. Up a couple of hills and through crooked pieces of bog here and there. You remember bogs? And down to the heather in the glen. Whew, until they came to a field full of bullions. Now, bullions, they're just weeds. Weeds, you know what weeds are. You know, like the Queen Anne's lace we get here in the Ozarks. And maybe you get it up there in Kansas City. Queen Anne's lace, it's got a tall stalk, and it opens like a fan, and it looks like lace if you look closely at it. It's a beautiful white flower. Until the summer wears on, and it shrivels into itself and creates the burrs that stick to our pant leg as we walk by and we can't get them off. Weeds, scourge of gardeners. So there was a big field of them, and the little old man pointed to one way out in the middle. "Oh yeah, about in the middle there to the left a bit. That's where me crock of guineas is stashed," he says. Tom looked, and he hadn't a thought to bring a pick or a shovel. So we got an idea, and he took one of his red garters off, and he tied it around that bullion. And he looked at the old man with that mean look again. "Now, you won't be going near that red garter now, will you?" "Oh, I wouldn't think of it. Wouldn't go near it." And then at last the little man said, "Now, you won't be having any more need of me, will you? See, I've got things to do, places to go. You'd let me go now, wouldn't you?" Tom looked at the old man. He said, "You know what, you're right. I won't be having any more need of you. And I want to thank you kindly. Thank you so much. And best of luck to you in the rest of your days." The old man looked up at Tom. "Ha! Best of luck to you and yourself. There's a lot of good it'll do when you get it." And Tom ran back to his farm as fast as his feet could carry him, grabbed a pick, grabbed a shovel, and went all the way back to the field. And when he got there, he dropped his tools and dropped his mouth a little bit. For what do you think he saw there in the field? I'll give you a minute to think. What do you think he saw? I'll tell you. Every weed in that field had a little red garter tied around it. Oh, and there was no use digging up the whole field, for there was 40 good Irish acres there. Oh, Tom picked up his pick and shovel. He started walking back a little slower than he came. Oh, you know what? And wished he'd never wished good luck on that old man at all. There we go, let's have a bit of a song. You can dance if you like.
What?
Don't we call it the dut-dut?
It's a dut-dut, yeah, because it's got that little, like,
dut-dut.
Dut-dut.
All right, so we talked about the mythology cycle. Remember, there's 4.
Bicycle, tricycle.
And let's see, we talked about, I haven't talked about the Ulster cycle. Now, we don't have much time to go through the Ulster cycle, but this is where you meet Cuchulainn, the great warrior. This is where we meet Queen Maeve and the great cattle raid of Cooley, the Hound of Ulster. Many legends surrounding Cuchulainn and the Ulster cycle. So I will put it upon you to look up Irish mythologies. You can just YouTube it, look through the library. Cuchulainn. Then the next cycle is called the Fenian cycle. This is where we meet Finn McCool. Finn McCool was a giant of a man, and there's many stories about him also. But one I'll share with you, about how he built the Giant's Causeway. Well, if you've never been to Ireland, on the tippy tip of Ireland, just across the sea from Scotland, there is like a path, like stones coming out of the ocean, hexagons, pillars of stones coming out. And it looks like a footpath that you walk across to Scotland on. Well, of course, Finn McCool made them. Well, you could say something about the volcanoes in the time, and it erupted, and the ocean cooled the stones before they couldn't, but that's science.
I wouldn't say nothing about the volcanoes, they'll just blow up.
And science is very cool, but we're not talking about science right now, are we? We're talking giants. Finn McCool was working at the Giant's Causeway with some of his relatives, and he heard a whisper on the wind across from Scotland that the great Scottish giant was on his way. Now, to see the Scottish giant, he had been looking for Finn for a long time, and Finn knew it, and he was a little, well, I wouldn't say scared, but he had no wish to meet him at all. He was a big giant. So as that whisper of a wave came to his ear, he looked at his relatives and said, you know, fellers, let's see, I better get home to me Oma. I'm afeard she's missing me something terrible, and I'm worried about her, and I better get along and go see about it. And off he went, back to the Hill of Allen, where he lived with his wife Oma. Not as big as the Hill of Tara, but that's another story. Went back home, opened the door. Oma looked at Finn. Finn McCool, what are you doing home so early? What? You have plenty of work to be doing at the causeway. I didn't expect you back so soon. Oh, he said. I was so worried that you was missing me and not getting along too well without me. And I just thought I'd better come back and see how you were. Oma looked right through that, as most wives do. What's the matter? The Scottish giant is on his way, and I think he's found out where we lived, and I just don't know what to do about it. He's an awful big giant, and do you know, he caught a thunderbolt in his bare hand and smashed it into a pancake, and he has it in his pocket for anyone to see. Ooh, that's a big giant. Well, let's start thinking about that, she says. And they both started to think. And then Oma came up with a plan. This is what we'll do. Oh, I got it, she said. So she started baking big round cakes and started gathering all the griddles she had. You know the griddles, they're iron skillets. You know, do you bake iron? You put cornbread in it and bake it, or put pancakes? Do you bake with an iron skillet? Well, she does. Anyway, she started sticking these skillets into the cakes to form around them, and she baked them right inside the cake. And then she made a cradle, a little baby cradle. Finn was looking, and he didn't know what to make of that. But then they heard the great pounding of feet coming up the hill. Oma said, and looked at Finn. Get in the cradle, put that cloth on your belly, that cloth on your forehead, and act like a baby. Go. Finn did as he was told, and he got into the cradle and leaned back. He looked rather silly, actually. And then Oma went to the door. And there the Scottish giant. God bless all in the house. And she said, God bless you, stranger. Come on in. So he came in and looked around. I'm looking for Finn McCool. Finn McCool. I want to have a little meeting with Finn. Well, Oma said, he's not at home. I'm afraid he's doing giant things. Here's me and the baby. Oh, there's a baby. The Scottish giant looked at that baby. That's an awful big baby, he thought to himself. Then Oma said, hey, I bet you're famished from your long trek. Here, I baked some cakes. Please, have a couple. That giant was a bit hungry, so he took the top one and took a big bite. Thunder and giblets, he said. 2 teeth fell out right there on the floor. I've lost my teeth. Oh, lost. Woman, what's in that cake? Oh, look at what you done. Oma looked at Finn. Well, I don't know. I don't understand. These are favourites of Finn. Why, his favourite meal, of course. He eats them just like that. Well, here, take one in the middle, maybe. It's not so hard. And she gave him another cake. He took it. Thunder and giblets, he said. 2 more teeth had just dropped out of his mouth. I keep eating those and I won't have another tooth in my mouth. Oh, woman, what's in those cakes? Well, I just don't understand, she said. Finn eats them all the time. So does the baby. She took one from the bottom, which didn't have a griddle. Gave it to the baby. Yummy. The Scottish giant looked at that baby. And he looked at the cakes. He looked at the baby again. He was having second thoughts. And finally he looked at Oma and said, you know, look at the time. Look at the time. I got to get going. Oh, got an appointment somewhere. Yeah, I got to get going. And you can tell Finn, I won't be back. And, it was so nice meeting you. And I got to get going. And he left. Well, Finn crawled out of that cradle. And him and Oma had a big hug and a big laugh on how they fooled the Scottish giant. Now, that was a wonderful story.
It was a good story.
Wasn't it a good story?
You tell it so scary.
I am not.
You got all those scary looks about you when you tell stories that are scary.
There are many more legends of Finn McCool, but we don't have time today.
Talk to both hands.
Now, the 4th cycle is the historical cycle, and you can look up those yourself also.
She's talking about me and historical.
So it's time to say fare thee well.
Yeah,
until next time we meet again, and hopefully it'll be in person, because we miss all of you there.
Fare thee well to you, my own true love. I'm going far away. I am leaving for California. You know darling, when I think of thee. I have sailed on a Yankee sailing ship, Davy Crockett, be her name, and her captain's name is Burgess, and they say she's a floating shame. So fare thee well, my own true love, when I return united we will be. It's not the leaving of Liverpool that grieves me, but my darling, when I think of thee. It's not the leaving of Liverpool that grieves me, but my darling, when I think of thee.
Huzzah! Until we meet again. Say goodnight or goodbye.
Goodbye. Goodbye.
Bye.